Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on page 1254. Aleph Reish Nun Daled. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. Good. So now it's all coming together now. This whole last, I will say, 32, 33, 34 pages. From Aleph Reish Chaf, 1220 to now 1254. 34 pages. And in summing up what we learned yesterday, that talking about the mile of neshamas over Torah, which makes, this is why they're called Binah, higher than Z'A. And in higher levels in Chochma, it's atzmis ha-Chochma, in contrast to the reflection of Chochma, neuvles Chochma, the droppings of Chochma and Torah. Atzmis ha-Chochma, how the child comes from the core essence of the father. Olu b'machshava, the word Allah. The higher level in machshava, and in higher levels it's pnimius ak, in contrast to chitzenius ak, and even higher lifnei tzimtzum, it's mushers, the souls are rooted in atzmus ein sof, where Torah's chochma ein sof, and even higher shashuyim atzmim, and then there's tainug atzmi mamish, as he said on page 1252. So all this establishes that the neshamas have something Torah does not have, and it's mashpia in Torah. But how do you reach this level of the neshama? It could be there. Many things have very deep source and root, but they're not accepted. But how do you access it? So that's the Aveda Mesiras Nefesh, Mesiras HaRatzon. Total commitment that there's no other Ratzon except for God. Complete obsession. All-consuming love, L'chol Moedecha, to the point that it's Pnimis HaRatzon Shebenefesh, Negeile, but Pnimis Nafshei, Pnimis HaAtzmas. That's Yechida Shebenefesh, he called it. Ratzon Echad Levad, L'shum Ratzon Zar Klal. So this Chitzenius HaRatzon, when the person Chitzenius can be the Chitzenius of the Etzem. And then there's the Pnimis HaRatzon. Das nimmt darum dem ganzen Etzem. It completely encompasses the total core. Klif is called atzmis, the hatiyah hazazas atzmis, that the very core is shaken up, is moved, is shifted in a fundamental way. That's Yechida. And that in turn awakens above Pnimis Atzmis, saying, so there should be Er Chodosh. So this is the Yichud Pnimi of Chochma and Binah that we've reached. The Yichud Pnimi of Chochma and Binah, which creates Er Chodosh, like Neshamas Chadoshes. And that's Dafka the Idvei Avedis Neshamas Ad Eshem Shoshem Mekeda Ha'atzmi. So in the process that we've discussed, we began Mutfa Murgish Muskel, pages back, that the Nefesh Elokis begins with its natural, almost childish behavioral love. Essentially, without necessarily a full understanding, just a natural love for God. That in turn matures and grows into a deliberate emotion, and the cognitive mind begins to regulate and guide it and elevate that type of love. To the point that the mind itself begins to conceive and begins to contemplate and comprehend levels of godliness that are higher than just what's natural to us, what we need, our needs. And that in turn also awakens new dimensions in love and in emotions. Then comes a point where we reach the Chitzenius HaMoichin and Pnimis HaMoichin as a person bar mitzvah and then older, all the way to godless Binah, and then godless Abba Chochma, which is even beyond the comprehensions, resonating truth of God's higher reality. And then and that in turn also affects the emotions that they elevate to that level, to the point that a person becomes so refined that the very emotions are now only about godliness. And now you awaken, you reveal the very core essence of a neshama's connection to God. Not as it is in a child, which is an immature katnus level, but on a godless level. That came after the mind. Now you're coming to a super conscious experience where Chochma is completely absorbed. And now the midas elevate Binah, that while Binah was involved with the Ephraim, with its offspring, guiding them, training them, refining them, protecting them, now the midas catapult Binah back to its core place where it stands side by side with Chochma, and they gaze at Arich and Atik, Nazivuk Shalom, which creates new energy, new neshamas, as we learned. And that in turn informs the emotions as well, because that the godless of this Moichin of Abba is now informing the emotions that they too should be on that level. And also Malchus, in all the levels of Malchus, till the point that Malchus becomes like Binah, and it's actually mashpi into the midas of Z'A, or different words than Neshamas transmit into Torah. So Torah is Z'A because of Chesed, Gvura, Kosher, Posel, and so on. And now it's being mashpia. And on the other hand, the midas have also elevated the mind because it's negay b'nefesh. It's negay to the atzmus of the person, the very core of the essence of the person. And when a person uses their mind about something that they can't live without, the mind reveals all kinds of new revelations. So everything is feeding everything in as we elevate to these higher states. And everything is accounted for, biti, achesi, imi, as well as the other levels that we discussed before that also talk about Binah as it elevates to Chochma, and as they both gaze and draw down from Atzmus and itself. But, as he said, the condition is Mesiras Nefesh, the Aved Mesiras Nefesh, Mesiras Haratzon, which is this Aveda where it's completely consumed. I don't think he mentions B'chol Meidecha explicitly, but it's very clear that that's the level of B'chol Meidecha, the higher level of B'chol Meidecha. So that's where we've reached till here. That's how somewhat sums up the whole process. And in truth, to really apply this to each one of us, we'd have to go back and break it down into levels and find how each level corresponds to where you stand. Because all these levels are relevant to everybody, even the highest levels. You just have to find how it translates into a person's personal lifestyle and life space, I should say, wherever we are, where we are in our own growth. But you have a whole formula here in the last literally 34 pages. But we're going to finish now. He's going to just tie up the last few points. If you remember, in the beginning of Biti Achesi Imi, he brought from Torah, he brought that this is the Yichud, 3 Yichudim. Actually, not from Torah, from Eitz Chaim. that the 3 Yichudim of Havaya and Eh-hiyeh, which is Biti, Havaya Lakim, which is Achesi, and Havaya Eh-hiyeh, godless, which is Imi. And he called that in Eitz Chaim, Ibur, Yanika, and Moichin. So he's not going to go back to the highest level was what? Yichud Havaya and Eh-hiyeh. So Havaya is like Z'A. So Z'A with Adnai would be like the daughter. Z'A is being mashpia into the daughter Malchus. Havaya Lakim is how Malchus elevates and stands in equal stature to Z'A, like a sister. And the Havaya Adnai, Eh-hiyeh rather, Havaya Eh-hiyeh is higher than Havaya, like Binah. So he's going to now refer to that. So he says, and I'm reading on the line on page 1254, the line that begins Dafka de Avedis Hanashama. Something like 15 lines from the top. 6, 9, 12. Actually, 13 lines from the top of page 1254. The last word. V'zehu hayichud Havaya Eh-hiyeh. And this highest level, where Abba ve'ima are nazivuk shalom yichud pnimi, and the neshamim said etzem sheirish mekeda ha'atzmi, atzma saying so that we have now awakened or stimulated and revealed the core connection of the soul to the source, higher than Torah and higher than everything. So he says, "V'zeu yichud Havaya Eh-hiyeh." This is referring to back, as I said, on page 1249. We spoke about the 3 Yichudim. If you look in the second paragraph there, he says the Yichud of Havaya Eh-hiyeh is godless, and that's the level of Imi, the mother. So now he says, this is the Yichud of Havaya and Eh-hiyeh. Now remember, Havaya is the highest name, but Eh-hiyeh in some ways is even higher than Havaya. It's the only time, it's when Hashem tells Moshe, Parsha Shmos, when he says, what should I tell the Jews when they ask me who you are, what your name is? He said, Eh-hiyeh Asher Eh-hiyeh. Cryptic name, but it's a very high level name. So he says, this is the Yichud of Havaya Eh-hiyeh, the Yedua. The Shem Eh-hiyeh Keser. Havaya is in Z'A. Kale is Chesed. Elokim is Gvura, etc. Says the Eh-hiyeh is Bekeser, Ubebina. I should have read it together. That the name Eh-hiyeh is in Keser and in Bina. V'hainu b'chinas atzmis habina, mamish. Shelamayla b'chinas hasaga. How do you say Keser and Bina in one breath? Because we're not talking about Bina as it associates with the midas, the mother that associates with the emotions as she's drawn down to them. We're talking about how the emotions have catapulted the mother to a place that's atzmi, is the very core of Bina, which is higher than comprehension. Bina is now sensing and resonating, even though it's expansive, not like Chochma initially was a yesh, but Bina now is also fully consumed with the clarity and the resonance of Chochma. So it's atzmi sabina that we learned earlier. So that's the name Eh-hiyeh. So we're talking about the higher level of Bina. That so Shem is Bekeser B'Bina. V'hainu, what does that mean? B'chinas is Galus Atik Shebebina. The revelation of Atik and Bina. Different words when we said Chochma Bina, gaze at Arich, and it draws down the 370 lights of Atik. So he's saying the Galus of Atik and Bina. He used that before as well. He used that expression. Where did he use it? I just remember that. Where's that? Atik Bibin. Oh, the bottom of page 1252. We're talking about Shuva reaching the fifth level, Keser. The core essence is his Galus Atik Shebebina. Okay. Havaya. Okay, I correct myself. I was referring to Havaya as Z'A. Here he's saying Havaya hu b'chinas Chochma. Saying that Havaya is the level of Chochma, because on page 1240, a second. I'm almost sure he had said earlier that Havaya is. Okay, sometimes Havaya is Z'A, but here, Z'A. Fine, it doesn't change the Havana, the Pshat. It says Havaya is the level of Chochma, like it says, Kamashkosav Hashem b'Chochma, which means Havaya b'Chochma and Chochma. So what do you have here? So now he's explaining the Yichud Havaya and Eh-hiyeh in the level of Imi. Okay, so this refers to the inner unification of Abba ve'ima, father and mother, Chochma and Bina. V'zehu, and this happens ayidei b'chinas Imi. That happens to the level of Imi she'aveda b'mesiras nefesh b'chinas aveda b'chol medecha. Here he does say it explicitly. The ava b'chol medecha shenizbar le'il. V'ayidei zeh mamshich. So it becomes through Imi. So now Imi is now standing in the stature together with Chochma. That's when they are equal. The mother is not descending to her offspring. She's standing side by side with Chochma. That creates a zivuk shlim, which draws from Arich and Atik. So it's the yichud of Havaya and Eh-hiyeh, because Eh-hiyeh is Keser and Bina, Atik and Bina, and Havaya is Chochma. So they're now totally united, each one feeding the other, of course. By Deizem Mamshich Er Chodosh. And through this, you draw down a new energy, B'Chochma Bina, and Chochma Bina Dahainu B'Teira. Okay, you have to say there's two explanations here in the levels, because before he was told, but Teira is Z'A, and Bina is being Mamshich in Z'A. Now he's saying, because we said, remember that Teira, that's on one level. There's another level, well, Teira is Chochma, but it's Nevelis Chochma. It's Chochma Shayach Lemidus. That's what he's saying. So now the Chodesh, Chochma Bina, that's higher, that reaches the higher level of the neshama, is higher than Teira. Mamshech er chodesh and Chochma Binah Dahainu b'Torah. And of course, also in Torah as Zah, the nigla the Torah, which is Zah. Oh, he says it right now, right afterwards. For who inyan limud Torah l'shma. This is the idea of learning Torah. Now he's explaining what means mashpia and Torah. Till now, we were talking about either they receive from Torah or they're equals to Torah as they develop the halachas. What means mashpia? He says to learn Torah l'shma. In other words, to learn Torah, l'shem ha-Torah, for the purpose of Torah, not for Torah directing you and giving you guidance and halacha. That's Torah is being mashpia to you. But you now learning Torah for the name of Torah, which is the Hamshach Gili Ein Sof b'Torah. That's the goal, to draw down Ein Sof in Torah. So there's Torah as it's given by God, and we follow its instructions and directives of what to do, what not to do, and so on. But now when you reach this level, you're reaching a higher level to the etzem. So now you can be mamshech from Elikus, that's higher, into the Torah, that it should be Torah l'shma, for the Shema, you're learning for the Shema Torah. That this is God's Torah, not because you want to know the halacha of what to do or not to do. To draw Ein Sof b'Torah, v'nimshach gili b'Zah u'malchus. Now he ties it all together, right? And this gili goes also into Zah, which is Torah that is nigla the Torah, that is Zah. And b'chlal in Zah, in Midas, u'malchus, as we learn malchus, which is the lowest level as it comes down into action and so on. And what do we mamshech there? B'chinas meichin de gadlus. The meichin de gadlus of Chochma and Binah. U'kameshin is bar le'il. As it was explained earlier, the Zohar Malchus hen Torah shebiksav and Torah shebal peh. Oh, he says it clearly. That Zohar Malchus is Torah shebiksav and Torah shebal peh. Yes, he did say that. I just want to see where he said that. Was that by the Rashbi? No, it was later. Yeah, the Torah yeah. On page 1248, he elaborated a bit more. Says when you draw it down, you're drawing down a Torah into Malchus, into Torah Shebal Peh, from Moichav Atik, from the mind of Atik, and also that the Kiyum HaMitzvahs B'Poel Mamish should be with Kabbalah Sel Malchus Shamayim. This is all the Aveda bringing that down into Malchus. That's what he said there. Now, where did he say that Torah was? I think it was a parenthesis. Just give me a moment. I'm just looking up something. I'll find it now. Okay. Does anyone remember where Malchus Zaz says Shpiksav Teresh B'Peh? I thought it was on page 1250. Now I don't see it there. Okay. So let me finish the last line, and then we'll ask questions. So this is Vanimshra Gili B'Zoh Malchus Mechem the Godless. So basically, Teresh B'Ksav and Teresh B'Alpeh is Zohar Malchus. So what is Chochma Binah is just in general Torah. And what are your mamshel b'chinas Gadlus Abba? And that goes back to the beginning of the whole discussion. The crown that the mother Binah crowns Malchus, crowns it put the crown on her son, which is was that Malchus or Z'A? No, Binah puts the crown onto Z'A. And yes, Yem Chasanah say the day when Z'A and Malchus are united. That's what we learned earlier on page 1248. Yeah. Okay. So that concludes this paragraph and this whole subject matter. So now I'll stop if there are any questions. But it does everything, ultimately bring everything together. Any questions? No? Okay. Everything is clear, the whole picture, because we're finishing a subject now, and I have to go now I want to move on to the next page, next paragraph. I want to make sure everything is clear.
Well, the zivug of Eh-hiyeh, Havaya, did he finish? I'm not looking at Ayin Beis in front of me. Did he finish that discussion about that zivug, or is that going to continue?
No, he finished. It's all finished now. Eh-hiyeh is Keser and Binah, Havaya is Chochma. That's the yichud of Pnimi of Havaya, and Eh-hiyeh is the yichud Pnimi of Chochma, Binah, and Keser.
Keser.
That's what he just said. Yeah. For some reason, I can't find this. I really need to see this.
And that's the level of Imi, of Mashpia into Torah. Is that level of Yichud of Havaya? That's Imi?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Mm. And that's only accessible through Mesiras Nefesh, Negela.
Yeah, correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just give me one moment. I just want to make sure I have it all. Okay. So if there are no questions, I'm going to move right along. Why not?
So, and this ultimate zivuk of Keser and Chochma Binah is the level of Metzach, staring at Metzach, of and bringing it down. The Shen Ayin Oros that we're bringing down, and that's
Dramatic, correct.
Correct, and that's learning Torah Lishma. That's a Torah Lishma, both Nigla and Nister. The Rabbi speaks about here Nigla, right? I don't have it in front of me.
Everything.
But everything. So everything. So this level of B'yel Mamshich, these from Keser, I mean Metzach Shen Ayin is only if we achieve Negela Nefesh, Mesiras Nefesh,
where you reach a level of complete obsession and all-consuming love of God. Yeah.
So if you're learning Torah with B'chol Modecha in order to bring the Gula, for example, which is not that wouldn't necessarily be called lishma, would it? If I'm learning Torah, try to understand how we bring geula, is that considered lishma? And doing it with, say, even somebody, not me, somebody is able to reach the level of doing that with
I
Nasiris
don't know.
Nefesh.
That you have to talk to your mashpia. I can't tell you. Lishma means you're learning it for not for any ulterior motive. You're learning it just for Torah itself, not even for you to know what Torah says for you, and to bring godliness into the Torah, to be mamshech elikus in Torah. That's what he says here.
Right. So if you're doing it in order to try to understand how to bring,
I don't
make
know
it
that you have to talk to mashpia. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
It depends if you're doing it to bring Mashiach.
Yes.
It's beautiful. I don't know if that's what he's talking about here. I don't know. I can't answer. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if that's called the Shema or not. Maybe. Not sure. We could speculate. I don't know what to say about that.
Thank you.
What do you think?
I think so. I think it probably would be, but if you're truly doing it with only lishma and no alternative motives and with Mesiris Nefesh, probably would be. I would think so, but I don't know. That's I'm asking that.
Yeah. Maybe mute whoever's.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, one second. Just one. Give me one more minute. I just want to see something. Okay. I'm going to continue now. Unless there are other questions, I'm going to continue reading now the next paragraph, which goes back 34 pages. "34 pages. So if you go back to page Aleph Reish Chaf, you'll see the whole topic of Mutva Murgish Muskel began after he asked some questions. What is the difference between Gan Eden that is created and the Gan Eden that follows our Torah mitzvahs? Adam and Chava were placed in a Gan Eden. It was there already, with trees and everything. And it's a level of tainuk, of pleasure, God's pleasure. It's a garden. And yet, la'avdol l'shamar, they came to serve and protect, to elevate it even further. The same thing with us. Gan Eden is a place in the spiritual worlds, but it also is reward, and the energy, the divine energy, increases in Gan Eden through our Havaya and Torah mitzvahs down on this earth. So he said on the bottom of page 1220 that this is the difference between Pnimius and Chitzenius of Malchus. That just like Gan Eden is a higher level, because all of the worlds come from Zion Tachtenis, the 7 lower spheres, and Gan Eden is the 3 higher levels. And Gan Eden is the 3 higher levels, which in general is Pnimius HaMalchus. So he says, "Kamay kein yesh b'Z'A gam kein primis uchitzenis." So the same thing in Z'A, there's primis uchitzenis, and that led us into the whole discussion of the different levels of midas of Z'A. Now, when there's no moichin, it's the chitzenis of Z'A. When there is moichin, it's primis of Z'A. And then we went on to go level by level, higher and higher and higher, from page 1221 on top, all the way to where we've reached now, 1254, in understanding the highest levels we can reach in our emotional and cognitive connection with Elokus. So now he's returning and saying, now we'll understand what we learned about Gan Eden. So I'm going to start the new paragraph on page 1254. As I said, I'd rather start at a new class, but we have time, so that's what we shall do. Okay, so it goes like this. Al-pi kol hanal, according to all the above, Yuvan HaHefresh will understand the difference between Gan Eden mitzad atzma, between Gan Eden how it is on its own, based on creation, ubein hamshacha beGan Eden, and distinguishing it from the transmission in Gan Eden, shemamshichim teis v'seir, that we draw down additional energy, ayidei aveda, through our work. Shal zeh nemar vayinecheyu beGan Eden lo avdel l'shamer. And to this is what is indicated in the pasuk, that he placed all the mechav, he placed them in Gan Eden lo l'shamra. So there was already a Gan Eden, and then he placed them to serve and protect, which means aveda of ramach mitzvosesa, shal salesesa, etc. So according to the above, we'll understand what is the difference between Gan Eden before aveda and Gan Eden after aveda. What additional energies do we draw into it? That's what he's going to discuss now. And he says like this: Dihine, because now Hagili de Gan Eden hu mebchinas Binah. The Gil in Gan Eden comes from the level of Binah, understanding. Shezeh inyan b'yud nivra elam haba. So the Gemara tells us b'yud nivra elam haba b'hei nivra elam hazeh. That with the letter Yud of Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Eibishter created, or not necessarily Yud Kei Vav Kei. He says the letter Yud, he created elam haba, the world to come. The Yud ubchinas Chochma. Yud is the level of Chochma, the spark, the dot of Chochma. And what does it mean? Be Yud nivra elam haba. What was created with this Chochma? So he says, "V'nivra boy," in this Chochma or with it was created elam haba b'chinas Binah. So Binah is the world, is the elam haba, which was created by Yud with the Chochma. And he's going to explain. V'hainu, the Gan Eden b'chinas Hei Rishena. Yeah, it is Yud Kei Vav Kei. Gan Eden is the Hei Rishena. Remember, Binah is like a hay, the first hay. Yud is Chochma, is a spark. Hay is expanded, an expansive letter. So the hay, the Gan Eden is the level of Hei Rishena, the first hay of the Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's how the Ur of Chochma comes in a form of comprehension. Hasog, you understand, it's not just a kernel of an eye, spark and flash of an idea. And this is when we say that in the Gan Eden, the neshamas have pleasure. What do they have pleasure from? They don't have pleasure from physical things, from good food or drink or and so on. Their pleasure is from Elokus. But pleasure, Chochma itself, is just a spark. It's when it comes and you understand godliness, it brings pleasure to the neshamas that are learning and studying in Gan Eden. Custom is as it's written about this. The Likutei Torah, the Alter Rebbe, Dibra Masla Ru'u Ki Hashem Nosan Lechem. Right in the beginning, I believe it's B'Shalach. Ubedibra Masla Shcheira Ani. So he's referring to two discourses in Likutei Torah that talk about what the pleasure of neshamas are in Gan Eden, coming from the level of Binah, that's Elam Haba. But B'Yud Nivra, which was created by the Yud of Chochma. V'zehu, and this is the meaning, Shagili de Gan Eden, Kulamayla Harba Mina Elamis. As we learned earlier, remember when God created Beishis Bara Lakim Hashemayim V'Sa'aretz, heaven, all of the earth, it's not all Gan Eden. He created many different countries and spaces. Then in one area, he created a Gan Eden. That means the worlds have one level, even on the physical level, also on the spiritual level. Gan Eden is a particular location. So now we understand what makes Gan Eden special over other places that God created. So he says this is what makes it special. And this is the meaning of saying that the Gili, the revelation of Gan Eden, is far greater and higher than the revelation in the other worlds. The Mashanim is because that which is drawn into the regular world, so to speak, is only the 7 lower spheres, Chesed through Malchus. And there, the primary energy there is Malchus. That's what we say, Behei Nivra, the Hey. He's not talking the Hey Tachtena, Hey Tata. The second Hey in Yud Kei Vav Kei, the lower one, through which Hey Tata, Bihi Baram, Behei Baram. Like the Pasuk says, Chazakim Bihi Baram. What's the Bihi? Behei. He created Elam Haza, not Elam Haba. Gan Eden was created in the Yud. And that's where the Gili is of the Tainug. The rest of the world comes from the Zayin Tachtenis, radiate Zayin Tachtenis, Malchus. And that's why it was created with a Hey. The Hey Baram, with a Hey. Uksiv Sheshis Yamim Osa Hashem, P'chinas Vav Ksav is the Z'A. That God created 6 days, which are the 6 dimensions of Z'A. Z'A is lower than Binah. That's the world. Gan Eden, and in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, in paradise, who Gili Gimer Shenis, there's a revelation of the 3 higher levels. B'chinas Moichin, the higher levels, behind B'chinas Binah Shekelelas Kol HaGimel Shenis. Like we learned, the Kodesh Kadoshim, Binah, which is Kelo, encompasses the 3 higher levels. Here he's most likely referring to Keser, Chochma, and Binah. So the rest of the worlds will get their energy from Chesed through Malchus, and primarily Malchus Behei, the lower Hey. Binah, Gan Eden gets its energy from the Zion, from the Gimel Rishenis, Keser, Chochma, Binah, which are encompassed in Binah, Elam Haba, Gan Eden. The commission is Baradil, as we discussed earlier. Okay, but this only explains so far the level of Gan Eden. We didn't yet discuss what happens through Avodah in Gan Eden. And that's going to come next in understanding this whole picture here. So he continues, unless somebody wants to ask something. Any question? Clear? Okay. So now he says, V'hinei, and now, this is not mutually exclusive. When you say the worlds are primarily connected with the midas of Z'A, the 7 lower levels, that doesn't mean there's no moichin. As we could learn, and as we have learned, there's a moichin hashayich lemidas. Also in Elamis, there's also a level of moichin. Let me just refresh our memories what this all means. It shouldn't just be cryptic words. Midas is when you relate to another, is an emotional relationship. Moichin is when you relate to yourself. When a person is involved in moichin, actually another person will be distracting. Midas is the exact opposite. Midas is all about the relationship. If you're thinking about things about your own thoughts, you're not going to have a good relationship. You know, often people speak to each other, even people they love, and their mind is elsewhere. So in Ruchnis, what this means is that in Elikuz, there's 2 levels. There's how God relates to existence on our terms. That's a relationship. That's Z'A. Then there's, if you want to have a taste of God on God's terms, that's Moichin. Remember, the interface of Ayin Beis insists and requires both. We want to have an interface of God on God's terms and us on our terms. But to do that effectively, you need to cover all the bases. So generally speaking, when God engages with existence, it's Z'A, it's Midas, Zayin Tachtenis. It's critical. When you want to have a taste of God as he is so-called above existence or beyond, you go to Moichin. In general, it would be like the difference between Torah and this world. Torah is God's mind as he wants us to understand what he wants of us. It's not just Chochma Sa'elim. It's not just the science and the mind of nature and science and the natural world. So in this context, Gan Eden, when you feel the Gilui of Gan Eden, you're feeling more God's deeper intentions. When you're in the world the world outside of Gan Eden, you're feeling more God's relationship with us on a level of Midas. So that's why Gan Eden is Binah, and the Eilamis, which is the Gimel Rishenis, and the Eilamis is Z'A Malchus, the Zayin Tachtenis. But that does not mean that the world doesn't have something from Moichin. It's not completely separate. However, the Moichin in the Eilamis, Achurak Mibchinis Chetzenius Binah. That's only Chetzenius Binah. Remember, we learned about the mother as it hovers over her chicks, over her offspring. That's Chetzenius Binah. That's how the mother, how Binah Seichel is involved. Moichin Hashayach Lemidus. Because you need the Midas also to be governed by Moichin. It's not Moichin Be'etzem. Ubegan Eden Ubchinis Pnimius Binah. And a Gan Eden is Pnimius Binah. So it's even further, the plot thickens. It's not just Zayin Tachtenis and Gimel Rishenis, Midas and Moichin. In Binah itself, there's Chetzenius Binah and there's Pnimius Binah in Gan Eden, Chetzenius Binah in the worlds as they associate with the Midas. Because even when you have a relationship, so it's true, you can't be sitting immersed in Ayin Beis and also be having a relationship with someone you love. But a relationship is not just purely emotional. It also has a mind. You're also thinking about the relationship. You're also applying your mind to it. It's not purely impulsive. However, it's the Chetzenius of Binah, not the Pnimius of Binah. V'hainu commission is bar le'il. And this means, as we learned earlier, as discussed earlier, the Chetzenius Amechin Ubchinis Hamurgish Shemetzad HaSeichel. I was bringing back the language of the last 34 pages. Remember the Murgish Metzad HaSeichel. It's still Murgish. It's still about emotions, but it's not emotions that are just impulsively following their whim. It's Metzad HaSeichel. The Seichel is guiding, is governing, but it's still Murgish. You're in the world of Midas, not in the world of Moichin. That's the Eilamis. Sha'ikerem B'chinis HaMidas. That the primary force there is emotions. But who B'chinis Murgish? Remember, Mutfa, Murgish, Muskel. It's not the level of Muskel, it's the level of Murgish. But in Murgish, it's the Seichel working in the Murgish. Like we see a child, there's a far cry from a newborn child who's just completely impulsive or reflexive. And let's say a 5-year-old, which is still emotional, but the emotions can be spoken to and can be guided, can be somewhat disciplined. So it's Murgish Mitzad HaSeichel. Raksha Murgish Einu B'chinis Midas Levad. The only thing is that the Murgish is not only Midas alone, pure raw emotions, Mitzad Hatfa, due to the very nature of the wiring of the person. Ki'im Shu Mitzad HaSeichel. The Midas are Mitzad HaSeichel. In other words, Seichel is governing, guiding, refining, directing. V'zeu B'chinis Katnus Hameichen B'chinis Katnus the Ima. So you can see here is literally using words from the last 30 pages. He's using words to now apply them. So this is the state of when we say the worlds, not Gan Eden. Katnus Hameichen, Katnus Ima. A more immature state of the mind, a more immature state of Ima, the Binah, Chetzenius Binah, as it relates to emotions. What about Pnimius Binah? Gan Eden. Aval B'chinis Pnimius Binah, a mature, a deeper sense of understanding and comprehension. Zeu B'chinis Muskel. Now we move to the third level, Muskel. Now you're talking about the mind, not as it relates, like we learned about the animals. Animals also have a wisdom and intelligence when they go hunting, but their intelligence is all there in order to survive. They don't sit and philosophize in abstract ideas that are not related to their interests. It's all about, and that's the way they're wired. But then there's muskel as seichel atzmei, where the ability to explore, to imagine, to go to places that are more than your self-interest, which is driven by emotions. This doesn't mean self-interest is bad. You can have emotions guided by seichel, and the self-interest is being served, and it's not hurting someone, but it's still midas. Al pi ha-seichel. Pnimius Binah Z'A b'chinas muskel. Now the primary force is intelligence, not emotions guided by intelligence. Intelligence itself. And even though this too has an element that's going to excite and stimulate the heart, this is not starting from emotional needs and subjectivity and self-interest and using the mind to fill that. Here, because you're contemplating on something, let's say godliness that's completely beyond us and not in our self-interest, automatically there'll be an excitement in the heart through this revelation. It's like a person who's, let's say, contemplating something that's not about you. It's about God. And that in turn will automatically trigger an emotion. So it's not saying there's no emotions, it's just saying that the driving force is intellect, not emotions. What you're getting here is a beautiful explanation, really, what is Gan Eden? You know, we usually talk about Gan Eden, you imagine it, a bunch of old Jews sitting in a kollel and learning all day. I don't know what other delights that they, then in Miziv Ashchina. But what does it really mean? It means that after the work in this world, in Gan Eden, you're getting a taste of godliness, not on our terms. Gan Eden is giving a taste from Binah that brings down Keser, Chochma and Keser. You're getting a taste of godliness on God's terms, what God's intentions are. Whereas in this world, even though there's moichin, it's moichin shayach l'midas. Now, obviously, the whole Aveda is that even in this world, we should elevate to these levels. But he's talking now, remember, before Aveda, he's just talking what Gan Eden is. So he says like this, okay. And as we learned, and when that happens, that your mind automatically gives birth to emotions, the midas are not sensed and felt. It's not like you're feeling and you're consumed with your feelings. You're standing in awe. You're contemplating on godliness. You feel lifted and elevated to a reality greater than yourself, and automatically and emotions are awakened, but it's not about you. So it's not about, oh, I feel great. Oh, I really want to document this beautiful experience. Because it's about the higher reality that you are now being consumed with. So therefore, it's not midas murgashim. We learned this also at length earlier, that the midas now are becoming less tangible. They're becoming more moichendik, so to speak. V'agam, he says, and those she'ena midas nasimai dezeh sichlim mamish, and even though we learned that on this level, Pnimis Binah, the midas have not become mamish seichel, they still are an emotional reaction. They're still guided by, and they're still defined by the parameters of your natural emotions. Because remember, we haven't yet changed the emotions. If you recall, this level of moichin has just lifted you to another place that's not about self-interest, but you're still the same you. But instead of you being excited about something that's self-interest, your emotions are being carried by the intelligence and the comprehension you're having. They're still mitzias dover. Ukamoshin is barliel, exactly, as we learned earlier. That's why we still call them midas, even though they're already the level of muscle, but we still call them midas emotions. But now we've come to a point that their mitzias, their existence, and their feeling, which is emotions, is not like the raw emotions that were guided by seichel. Now seichel has lifted the person and the very emotions that were wired by to a greater place, but it's not transformed you yet. So they become this pnimis hamechin has lifted you to that place. But to say that completely no, the emotions are not the ones that you were born with, that's not the case yet. V'hainu, this means Bechinas God. I'm on page 1255. The level of Gadlus Hamechem Bechinas Gadlus Ima. This is the Gadlus of Binah of Ima. Pnimius Binah. Ach Kol Zeh. You know what? I think I'm going to stop here. Now he's going to continue to talk about, can we get to a place where it changes? And there we're going to learn what Gan Eden is like after Aveda. Right now we've established the Ilamis are essentially based on natural wiring of existence, and they can be guided by Seichel, no problem. But the Seichel is secondary to the guiding emotional or subjectivity, if you wish, of existence. Then there's a level of Pnimius Bina, where now you're guided by the mind that's taking you to another place, but you're still the same you, but now you've been elevated to another place. And then we're going to learn that you actually get transformed. A new thing happens. You actually change your midas. Even your natural wiring can be changed. That what we learn in Gadlus Abba, Chochma takes us to that place, and that will ultimately elevate everything else. But we'll learn it all inside. But that's where he's going now, and we'll finally understand what Gan Eden is through Aveda, not just Gan Eden as it's naturally higher than the world. So far, Z'A, Moichin, Chassidus Binah in Z'A, and that's the worlds, and Pnimius Binah in the Gan Eden. But still, it's still Moichin that's shaykh to Midas, but its Moichin now is starting to become dominant factor in elevating the person. So we're stopping on top of page 1255. Please, anybody has any questions, go for it.
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a question. You know the Rabbi's famous speech that says, "Open up your eyes, Mashiach is here." Does that mean that this is a physical manifestation of this level that we're talking to right now?
I don't know. Not necessarily. Open your eyes can also be that you look at the natural events and you realize they're really miracles. The fall of the Soviet Union, different development of technology. I mean, in general, when a person looks at the world around them and sees the godliness in it, and sees a pattern of Geula, that we are beginning to see how the world is becoming more refined in many different ways, I would say it's a Gili Alakus, whether it means it's a Gili from Gan Eden. I mean, relatively, everything is relative. It means that you've moved from just looking at the world as events happening that may be beneficial to us, and even beneficial to Torah mitzvahs, and really seeing, as the Rebbe says, to open your eyes, the godliness, the God's invisible hand that is leading the world to a more geuladic place. But it's hard to really quantify what level of gili that is. You know, it could also be different people see it differently. It can be, but it's definitely, let's put it this way, it's more than just looking at the worlds and their beautiful nature. It's also seeing the divine plan, which we call geula, within it. So in that sense, there's something in common here, that you're seeing more the pnimius of it rather than the chitzenius of it. So you could apply it to that, but it's hard to quantify exactly what level it is. Okay? Good. Understood? Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, sure. Any other questions?
On a practical level, this whole the techniques to achieve some of these levels is in davening, and is that the Aveda that's mentioned? I mean,
he says explicitly,
intellectually, I understand it.
The Rebbe Rashab himself said that we say every day in V'ahavta.
So it is it's in davening primarily, you say.
I didn't say that. It's also in learning Torah. He spoke about how you're supposed to learn Torah. But the way to get it is to have an emotional relationship with God, where God becomes important to you to the point of indispensable to you. That is, all Avodah is that. Specifically, that's V'ahavta b'chol ma'odecha, is that level. But you could spread it out to all of davening. You could spread it out to also when a person is committed to doing a mitzvah. He said to do mitzvahs with Kabbalah Soil, Malchus Shamayim, Mesiras Harotzen. You're already completely committed to God. It's not just during davening.
So the truth is, it really implemented through Avodah in many, many different ways. Even how you would conduct your daily affairs. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Anybody else want to ask anything? Okay, so we're stopping here on top of 1255, right? Literally on the top.